Hi, folks. Andy here. Welcome to this IDRA event about client surveys. Meg, I think except for letting everybody in from the waiting room, I think I want to pass it over to you. Is that right?
That is right. I have agreed to take this gauntlet. No. Welcome, everyone. We are glad that you're here. This is always a really interesting topic. And so we saw the great response to a single question and thought it was time to do another webinar. And we really wanted to open it up to everyone to talk about client surveys. But before we start, I want to say, so we want to talk about client surveys, but I think we really want to get into also just sort of the ways that we can connect with clients, whether client surveys are the best way to do that, if there are other ways to do that, and the best ways to survey clients. So we can talk a little bit about logistics. That's something that we've talked about a lot. I think we want to talk a little bit more about the theory this time, if possible, but obviously the whatever people want to talk about, we will allow that to happen and be open to that. So if anyone has anything they want to start with or any questions they want to start with, just for some background for people who don't know me, I work in Travis County, Texas, which is Austin, Texas. We used to be a primarily managed assigned counsel. I mean, we're still primarily in terms of percentages, but we also have a PD now. But with assigned counsel, there are obviously many roadblocks that PDs may not face. And so we wanted to sort of make sure that we're talking about all the kinds of systems. Another thing that we have done in our system is client feedback, and we find that that is important too. So, or complaints is really, it's the complaint tracking system, and we have a better one now, and that's been helpful. But has anyone had any experiences with client survey? Is anyone in the middle of a client survey that they're trying to do right now that they'd like to talk about? Any questions?
Yeah, Meg, I have one thing to say. First of all, I'm glad to be here. I'm from the Bronx Defenders, a public defender's office located in New York City in the cornerstone of the South Bronx. And one roadblock, we currently had a client experience survey initiative. We mailed out over 300 of our surveys to our incarcerated clients, formerly incarcerated clients, and to our non-incarcerated clients. And one problem that we had in the client experience survey, we had a qualitative aspect and a quantitative aspect. On the quantitative questions, our clients, our incarcerated clients, Spanish-speaking incarcerated clients, they all answered that, bubbled some questions, some answers, darkened some answers, easy. On the qualitative part, especially our Spanish-speaking clients, they didn't answer those questions. When it came to, writing down your thoughts, they didn't answer those questions. So I was wondering, Meg, and the rest of the audience, do you feel like face-to-face contact with our Spanish-speaking clients or anyone that hesitates to write down the qualitative questions, do you feel like direct contact will work? Will it encourage them, or will it infect the process? Because if someone's in front of them, do you feel like they'll have the need to say something good because the person's in front of them? What's everybody's take on that?
Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. This is Alexis McNally from the International Legal Foundation. We are in, so the International Legal Foundation, it's a legal aid organization that works in countries in transition. And so we have offices in Myanmar, Afghanistan, Palestine, Tunisia. and Nepal. And so I'm in the middle of a client satisfaction survey right now that I developed for our clients. Concerning your question, Noel, we have we've just started integrating social workers into the office. And so we're having a social worker that has not had direct contact with the client actually calling the client and going through the questions with them and filling it out on a Google form. And so even though it is, and this is mostly to do with the fact that a lot of our clients, they might not have an email address or a steady internet connection due to the blackouts and the conditions that we're working in. And so it's better to have someone actually call the client. And then we have these Google forms that we're filling out with the client. And then it's concerning qualitative information, rather than having, a bunch of open-ended questions, we have, kind of I think it's a Likert scale where it's like, 1 to 5, a variation of answers that they can give to us depending on the question that we're asking, whether it's their perception of justice before and after their interaction with our organization, or maybe, whether or not they felt like their lawyer fought for them or something like that, rather than it being, an open-ended question. We've kind of given them, 5 options from, horrible to good to great that they can fill out there.
So let me, so this is all really good information. Let me take a step back. And I think part of the answer to the question and part of sort of the best way to do it is sort of think about what is the goal of the client survey. Okay. So, and I think that's really, okay. So from a research standpoint, right, there's certain things that you want from a survey to make it unbiased and to give you the correct information and all these things and sort of response rates. And then there's sort of the thing, there's just a lot of different reasons that we might do these. And I think that partly will drive what the answer to your question is, right? So I think that we do see bias when people, depending on the way that people answer questions in general, we see differences. And so there is going to be that change. But sort of from my point of view, so one of the things we want to do with client satisfaction surveys is to have some data for researchers. But another thing for offices and for providers is they want to know if there's something that they can do differently. Is there something that we're not doing? Is there something that the clients need that we're not meeting? Is there something that we're not seeing with our staff? And I think that's another sort of layer of this discussion. And I just want to, sort of open it up and think about, how are people using client surveys? Are you using it more for internal office management? Are you using it more for funding and performance measures and things like that? Are people using them in different ways? People want to comment on that, talk about how they're using them or sort of successes in, like, for me right now, I'm really interested in sort of how can we use client feedback to better serve the clients, which is always, obviously one goal of these kinds of things. Have people had, do people have successes of where they've, use that? Go ahead, Paul.
So when I actually worked for Pima County Public Defense Services, we did a survey, which we're actually sort of doing a similar version in Pinal County, but with specifically to the initial appearance, which is both the detention hearing and the probable cause hearing. And we did find that there were some specific things that we could change about our recommended script that our lawyers use when talking to the clients to sort of help them understand what was taking place during the hearing. We also made some recommendations to the judges. Some judges read that email, some judges didn't. But that was a particular hearing, obviously, but really the initial hearing that our clients actually sort of get, impacted with the criminal justice system. And so it was really easy to make changes because it was one event. We also have specific lawyers who would do that. And so it was a little bit easier to train those lawyers on, this is the script, we've added this language because of these things. So we did do that. And as a part of that, we also, when we were looking at the data, we actually went into where the initial appearances were taking place so that we were kind of present in the moment with with our committee that was reviewing the data, and sort of looked at it while we were there, and could actually kind of be present, which I think was a little bit more helpful as far as, oh yeah, this is how that's happening. And so those are some thoughts, but it wasn't as a greater impact of the office client survey, but very effective, I think, in making some changes.
Did you feel like your response rates were reasonable or low? Or, I mean, I assume they're all, Andy asked about response rates, and I think we'll get to that later, but I just want to ask you now so that we can have that in the back of our mind.
Yeah, so we didn't have any IRB that we had to deal with. Lisa Bobny, I actually think, I don't know if she's on, but she kind of worked with us on that particular study. But so we kind of had a captive audience because we did it after IAs. We did tell them that they could, we would call them back up to this window where we would meet with them. So it was a confidential conversation between the client, and we had students from the university who were interns asking the questions completely anonymously. They were not the lawyers that represented them in the hearing. We told them, what the survey was about, and told them, if you want to take place, you can sit here and we'll go through a few questions with you. And we did read the survey out loud because the jail was not comfortable giving them paper and pens and different things. So but we did have interns who were kind of removed a little bit from the process. But they were essentially a captive audience. We had a couple of people of, I think the N over the 2 weeks, and Lisa might be able to correct me if she is on, I'm not sure, but it was about 30 a day over a 14-day period. So we had about 420. And again, it was, minutes after the hearing. But I think we only had a couple of people who declined, but what else were they going to do during that time? So it wasn't the greatest from a IRB standpoint.
Right. I think that really gets to some of this, right, which is sort of what is your point of your survey, and how are we going to be using it? I come from a research background, and so I do get a little bit obsessed with, like, is it random? What is it good for research? And I think that's not always, as a researcher, I have to take a step back when I'm working more with offices and say, like, how is this impacting them? Stephen, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so I have not worked directly on client surveys in a public defender office, but in working on this large scale research project in New York State, we've been talking with an advisory board of impacted people about what it looks like to reach out to people who have received services. And some of the suggestions we've gotten have been very different from what I wouldn't say different from what I would expect, but certainly have changed the way we're thinking about this. Working with community groups in an area to find people who have been impacted by the justice system, as opposed to working through the office that provided those services, right? Because I think the message we've gotten is that working through community groups and building those community relationships, you're much more likely to get honest answers out of people as to what kind of experience they've had, especially given the power dynamics between clients and the people who are giving them basically a service in a system where they feel kind of disempowered. So I'm just curious if anybody's looked at that angle of sort of building community relationships instead of maybe I know it's just a different, we're just asking a different question. Like you say, Meg, we're just approaching this from a different angle. We're not trying to survey everybody who got services from an office. We're just trying to get a sense of what is the impact on the community of the services being delivered in that area. So yeah, I don't know, involvement with community groups and things like that. I don't know if anybody's experimented with that.
Hi, Alexis again. We haven't been directly looking at involvement with community groups, but there are a couple of questions on our survey to figure out whether or not the referrals that we made, to social services organizations and the for psychosocial support and things like that, whether or not those referrals were made and what the satisfaction, I guess, with that connection was with clients. And so that's kind of a way that we're gauging whether or not the services that we don't provide directly impacted our client. And then just quickly for the other things that we're looking for with our survey, it's, recidivism rates, the performance of our lawyers and of, any other supporting staff in our office. And then, whether or not what their perception is of the justice system and whether or not that has shifted at all thanks to their interaction with our organization.
Mm-hmm.
And Meg, as for the Bronx Defenders, the purpose of our client experience survey was to basically put the holistic defense model on a verdict. We wanted to prove that not only will our clients identify the holistic defense model, but they will bring up, we saw a common theme that our clients didn't just talk about the service our office offers inside the courtroom, but also outside the courtroom, where we help our clients apply for work permits, where we help our clients fight back against a very aggressive landlord, where we help our clients to access outside resources, to food pantries, where we help our clients apply to food stamps by speaking with New York's HRA, Human Resources Administration agencies. I feel like many of our clients, they were focused on not just inside the courtroom, but outside of the courtroom. So in that case, how will we, because I know you mentioned, what other purposes do you have for your survey? And, you mentioned, is it for funding? Is it to prove a point? On a I know you have a lot of experience in the realm of research. How will we publicize the results of our survey to prove that the holistic defense model does work, and here are the clients who are saying that it's working?
I mean, I'll put in a plug for IDRA's conferences right now for publicizing. So, I mean, I think that always with, those kinds of things is you're trying to show and give examples and be persuasive that this is really a model that benefits people, and that you want to, I mean, I don't want to say like prove, because I feel like that's like, okay, we set up a survey to show what we wanted to show, but you want to get information about like whether or not those things that you think matter are actually, filtering through to the client, and that it's actually impacting the client, and then not just, sort of like, well, of course it matters that we fight, mean landlords, but that people actually, that matters to the client, that changes things. And I think, so that's sort of how I see it. And I think one of the best, or, writing reports, publicizing those reports, giving those talks at conferences can help, get out the message of where you're seeing that impact, how that impact, is being experienced by the clients. I think those kinds of things can always help, sort of get that information to other people who are interested. I don't know if other people have comments about that.
Yeah, I would just add that I think it heavily depends on the audience, and I think you probably do want a multifaceted approach, because I think presenting stuff like that to IDRA is great, and presenting to like this group is going to be a very different thing than like trying to present to the public, for instance, if you're just trying to like get the word out about what you do. We have found that like very short reports that have like really kind of headlining conclusions and a lot of kind of anecdotal stuff, especially if you're actually doing interviews with these people. I'm sure there's excellent quotes in there that could go into like a very short report for public consumption. And honestly, like of the stuff that I have written personally in doing this work, at least, like that's the stuff that the most people hear about is like, that kind of report, like a super short report that doesn't go into the methodology very much, and has some very eye-catching features, whether that's like specific quotes or like specific headlines that are particularly arresting for people. And then also I present that stuff to IDRA in what I would say is like a more detailed way and kind of a more open to criticism way, honestly. So that's been my experience, but that I don't think that's an easy thing to do at all. It's just, you know, that's a goal I try to hit, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, Andy, just a second. Just as a reminder, Stephen wrote, submissions are now open for the ASC in the fall. And if you want to still present at the spring conference, let us know, and we will see what we can do. Andy.
Thank you so much. I just this may or may not be a constructive sort of intervention in the conversation, but I wanted to consider, or maybe just ask openly, how important it was to find ways in a communication and dissemination strategy in a survey of this kind to communicate the findings of the survey back to the affected community so that members of that community can kind of receive and respond them also. I'm always conscious that, you know, surveys, we always try and keep them low burden because obviously people don't have time or inclination to fill them out. At the same time, they are potentially, or maybe always, extractive. You're getting information out of the least powerful people in the system. And then they've given you this precious information that you're going to then use for a purpose. And I wonder if there isn't some way also to return the value of the information and the research back to the community that generated it. Anyway, so I think that might be a question for, to me, these are communications questions, not maybe research questions, except maybe in some sort of ethical way. But I think if I would maybe thinking about how to use that information, I would maybe try and think about a way to communicate it back to the community that generated it, because that's a way of actually showing back to them that what you took from them is valuable and is important, and you are using it, and it didn't just disappear into a void and wasn't just used for some distant purpose that doesn't connect to them.
Robin has her hand up, so let us go ahead.
Hey everybody, I'm Robin. I'm a colleague of Noel's at the Bronx Defenders, and thank you so much for this conversation, because this is work that our office has been trying to figure out for many, many years. I will say in the last 2 years, we had the good fortune to be able to work with an organization called Listen for Good. I don't know if anybody's familiar with them, but they specifically assist nonprofits with client and participant feedback surveys. And Andy, to the point that you made, they help you with every stage of the process and encourage you to what they call close the loop, which is actually reporting back to the people that you're trying to serve, to be accountable to people. And so the beginning is developing survey methodology, which we kind of freestyled it for many years, but it turns out just being a lawyer doesn't actually mean you know how to write good surveys and survey questions. And then the data collection. Third phase is sort of assessment and analysis. Fourth phase is implementation internally to change or reflect on, how you should respond to what you've heard from your clients. And the fifth is being accountable, closing the loop, telling people, we heard from you, thank you for participating. This is what we have done in response. And then you start the loop again. So that's been really helpful to have kind of a partner that is an expert in this and has worked with a lot of different nonprofits to bring us through each of those stages. And I can throw that in the chat, Stephen. That's their website.
Yeah, that's great information. Thank you. Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to add to Robin's point, not from my experience of surveying clients, but my wife is a research evaluator in juvenile, or was in juvenile courts, and they did a survey for juvenile detention clients or inmates, I guess, and they sort of were just doing it every year over and over. And I mean, obviously, these people sometimes cycle through the system, and that was one of the big reasons why they weren't participating anymore. And I think just knowing our clients too, we have clients that kind of cycle through, and if you keep asking the same questions over and over without kind of showing some kind of, you know, action or what it is that we're trying to do with it, and perhaps one of the things that, you know, if we are repeating these types of surveys over and over, we should maybe preface it, you know, into some degree of, we know we've done this in the past, and here's some things that have come from it. It could be really short and simple, but something to allow people as they're reading the survey to know that they're listening. And I think from that standpoint too, perhaps, I know that from a research standpoint, we like to ask the same questions over and over, but I think some people get frustrated by that because they're like, I've answered these questions before. And so considering what could we change or add, you know, each year or every couple of years to sort of help us learn new things, but also show people that this is not just something that we're constantly sending out and not actually reading and looking into and responding to. So just some thoughts on that, as they are the same types of people that we're representing.
Cynthia, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Andy just reminded me that a project that I was involved in several years ago, which was a program evaluation of the Red Hook Community Justice Center, which is a community court in Red Hook, Brooklyn, involved an offender survey. We called it community survey, but it was really targeted at people who had been involved in the justice system in either the court that we were looking at or the comparison courts. And we hired an ethnographer to do what was called respondent-driven sampling, which is a way to try to recruit participants. And the method is supposed to create a relatively representative sample. And what the ethnographers did was they found 3 what they called seed subjects, which were people that they recruited, I think, at a bodega across the street from a court, like just coming out of court after their court appearance. And they handed them a coupon that said, if you show up to our survey, it was an in-person survey, so there was an interviewer, we will give you $20, and then we will give you 3 more coupons that you can hand out to your friends and associates. And for each of those people who comes and redeems the coupon and participates in our survey, we will give you an additional $10. And so and it goes on and on and on, similar to a snowball or chain referral sampling system. And there are ways that you can there are measures of homophily that you can calculate to try to determine to what degree the people in your chain are recruiting other people who are just like them. In this particular instance, the coupons were so popular that the ethnographer that we hired, for some reason, thought that the measures of homophily were not suitable to calculate, and he didn't do that. But we got a large number of participants this way very, very quickly. In fact, the interviewers were kind of overwhelmed. And this is in contrast to the original idea for recruitment was to work with some community groups so they invited representatives from community groups that worked with the population under study to come to focus groups, and then they were going to talk about the recruitment strategy at those focus groups. Nobody showed up to those focus groups. So in that case, the partnership with community organizations was not effective, but the coupons were very effective, and we got a very large sample. And
Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you. So I wanted to respond by saying thank you to Cynthia. I'm just fascinated by that story, and the reason is, and Meg, I'll allow you to redirect this conversation in case I'm taking us off track somehow. But like, one thing that, at least in my experience, not having done these surveys but having observed so many other people trying to do them, is that there are such challenges in getting large numbers of respondents, and certainly challenges in defending the proposition that the respondents that you've got represent a larger population. My general observation would be that I've seen plenty of research projects, including by people on this call, who for a short time have been able to target respondents and get good response rates, but I have not yet seen, but would love to know if this has happened, some defender organization which is routinely putting out client surveys which actually get good response rates. Like it's not very common for defender institutions even to try to do this, but when they do, often the response rates, assuming they're just mailing these things out, are single digits, very, very low indeed. The totally inspiring thing about Cynthia's story, I thought, was although apparently it didn't work out, was that her research partner appeared to have solved or have a method of solving all of this. And if the respondent-driven sampling strategy had worked out, they would have been able to sample a relatively modest number of people, but actually make some colorable claim anyway to having a representative sample of all defendants. My interpretation of what we can do with client surveys in contexts where response rates are very low is that they might be useful for identifying individual cases where somebody had something terrible happen and they're motivated to write the survey out and it's sort of a red flag. But in most situations, it won't be possible to use data like that to say that we've understood something new about clients generally, because we just don't have a response rate high enough. And to me, those research questions are actually really interesting. And in terms of a purpose of using a client survey, for me, it would be trying to understand like when and why are clients most contented with the kinds of services that they've got. And I use the word contented, acknowledging that it's kind of vague, or at least perhaps not the right word. But of course, you can only do that with good samples. So Cynthia's solution seems really tantalizing to me, even though it didn't work out this time around. And I would love to know if there is a defender agency out there that has a client survey that it is routinely sending out, that it actually does get a decent response rate to. Like, what is the trick? Or does it just come down to you have to follow up with people a lot, or you have to actually pay them for their time or something like that, all of which are fine points, but probably not something a defender agency would do in a kind of a routine, as part of its routine operations.
Andrew, to answer your question, how do we actually attract respondents? That was a topic that Robin and I discussed, and there was an idea, maybe we should, like Cynthia mentioned, offer an inducement, here's this coupon, or, a Metro card, something like that. But I always was in the camp where I felt like, I feel like we need to take into account the bias that someone can have when you offer an inducement. I feel like if you're too encouraged to respond to the survey, you're going to say things, because all people like to please other people. You're going to say things that are pleasing to my organization. And in terms of, getting respondents to respond to our survey, we sent out the survey during COVID, during the era of COVID. So there was a really, we felt like, wow, if we send out this survey where our clients, critique us harshly, even more harshly because of the conditions that COVID brought. But no, I really feel like just, you need to interact with your clients. If it means sending them mail, if it means talking to their legal team and telling their legal team, hey, maybe you should respond to the survey that we mailed you. I feel like that's the only method. You need to actually have a line of communication with them. I think when you bring out an inducement, bias starts to enter the space.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to offer, not use this at all. And in Pinal County, we don't have this problem nearly to the level of other counties. But, one potential offer that you could do, especially if you could get the courts to partner with you, is a reduction in attorney fees. Courts can weigh those things at the end of the cases, and if they could use that certificate to reduce their attorney fees as well, as they're providing feedback towards the attorney performance. Now, you would have to get the courts on board with that, but there's plenty of courts who already recognize that attorney fees are kind of this issue, and the judges really just want to see the client investing in their cases. And so I think this could be a potential argument that they're investing by providing feedback on their attorney's performance and you could make it still anonymous, but having a certificate at the end that prints out with like a barcode or something that then they could take to the courts, to the clerk's office and have $25 or $50 taken off. It'd be very little cost. I mean, it would cost revenue, but in general, it's revenue that usually, at least within Arizona, both in Pima and Pinal, revenue that we don't always rely upon because it varies every year. So it's just something to consider as well as a potential reward that is fairly affordable and possibly doable.
Sorry, Paul, non-attorney here. Could you go into more detail into what you just said? I feel like you said something important that I just didn't understand.
Well, I don't know if I did or didn't, but I will go ahead and re-explain it. So the courts, most courts throughout the country impose what's called an attorney fee upon the clients who are being represented, and so essentially it can vary in vast amounts, and it's one of the things that actually, from like a criminal justice reform angle, like it's so impactful on clients because these fees will stick throughout the end of the case, and then even after the case is over, some courts in some states they won't even resolve the probation until all the fees are paid. Sometimes some types of fees can go towards what's basically like it will go towards like a civil type of fee that leaves the criminal case, but then enters into the court having a debt upon you as individuals. And in Arizona, particularly, they actually put a lien on your taxes. So if you get tax returns, they'll take it from your tax returns before they pay you the tax returns back. That's after a couple of years of not paying. And so the thought that I had was is if we could work with the courts to get an agreement that that, you know, if they responded to the survey at the end, they would get some kind of barcode or some kind of certificate that we could validate it. Maybe it's a unique number, although the unique number is difficult because you have to be careful that it doesn't get tied back to the client somehow. But if there was a way that you could get it to where they could print out that certificate, go to the clerk's office and say, I took the survey, please waive $50 of my attorney fees. Because I think judges, I think if you went to presiding judges and proposed this, judges would see it as their clients are clearly invested in their case. They're clearly paying attention. They're giving feedback to the system. I don't know all judges, but I could see how the courts could, if you propose it as they're clearly invested by giving us feedback. They're giving us performance evaluations. Anyway, and then it's very minimal cost because you're not actually paying out $50. You're waiving $50 of revenue. And the important thing about that is that even though it's sort of a cost, a lot of systems, it varies every year how much revenue we get from that. So it's not something that we generally budget an exact amount for. So if it varies slightly because everybody got $50 less. Anyway, so it kind of is a double bonus because then clients get some of their attorney's fees waived, which I don't believe in attorney's fees in general. But then also we could potentially give them some kind of incentive for why they should fill it out. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
While we're talking about just how to encourage participation, I wanted to make one other point about the Red Hook project, that survey specifically, which was I think one reason that the recruitment was so wildly successful in that survey is the person who was handing out those initial coupons. So you can't see me, but I am a middle-aged white lady who looks like a lawyer. And everybody thinks I'm a lawyer. I don't look like the kind of person that you would necessarily want to talk to. The person that we had, the ethnographer, this guy had decades of experience blending into the types of populations that we wanted to survey. And so he just, in an initial conversation, he knew how to build that trust and rapport. And so when he handed out those 3 initial seed coupons, those 3 initial seed recruits were able to go to the people that they were recruiting and say, I met this guy and he's really interesting and he has some really interesting questions to ask us and I think we can trust him. And I think that was just knowing and working with those ethnographers. They were uniquely suited to be able to talk to that population. And I think that's something that we have to really consider as researchers, is our credibility with that population can really help with recruitment.
Sydney, that actually makes a lot of sense, because I think it was Andrew that mentioned this, but you know, when we're requesting our clients or our community members to fill out the survey, there's really an extractive side on our side. And you know, to your point, you want someone that's like an insider, someone who's a part of the community, someone with charisma, where instead of it being so extractive, it's like, no, just encouragement, you know. We want you to be a part of this process too. You're a part of the team. I really like that.
Marla?
I've been sitting here thinking about how to contribute to this conversation. For those of you who don't know, I'm a faculty member at Indiana University, and a couple of years back, some colleagues and I conducted a client satisfaction survey. And our approach is, I would say, a little bit different than what others have done. And I'm not saying it, you know, it just had some advantages and disadvantages, I think. One of the things that we experienced from the get-go was that we had the chief PD. I mean, we had support from the chief PD, from the judges, from the jail, from the Department of Correction. I mean, we at the outset tried to get as much support as we could, which I think helped quite a bit. We initially wanted to interview as many people, and I have to be careful. I wouldn't say it's necessarily an interview. What we did was really to administer the questionnaire face to face, because our sense was that there would be people who could not read necessarily. We thought that people would not want to respond to the mail surveys, which is exactly what happened. We had very low response rate with mail. We had very low response rate with phones. But when we actually met with individuals in the jail, and we just had individual rooms. We were able to go in and meet with people and ask them if they agreed to participate. And we had overwhelming agreement at that time. Although I will say, when we tried to do the follow-up with people, both those who were in jail and some who had been sent to different prisons across the state, those in prison did not respond. Right. So look, we sent out an initial inquiry. Would you be willing to have somebody come and speak to you, you know, as a follow-up? And we had very few who agreed to do that. But I can tell you, for those who we did interview, and I would say I did those, they were so grateful. One of the most meaningful experiences for me in the whole process was when I went in and I met with somebody who looked at me and said, "You drove all the way here to hear what I had to say?" And I said, "Absolutely." And they were just shocked. And so I think having a variety of different approaches to attempting to reach out to people is really important. I will say that we also did a combination of closed-ended and open-ended questions. And I think that being able to do that face-to-face allowed us to be able to ask those open-ended questions. And I would say that we had, in some respects, those were the times when we got those little kernels, right? That I think Torrin was talking about before, when you get a really good quote where somebody can respond to that, because that humanizes the entire process. So for administrators, it may be important to know what percentage of individuals felt a particular way, or how responsive or how effective, or all those really critical questions are. But for some of the policymakers and the like, my sense was that it was more those anecdotal quotes that were more persuasive. So I don't know that I have necessarily a specific question or something to contribute. I just felt that we had slightly different, we did have to go through IRB as well. And that's a full committee, because people, you know, justice involved individuals, obviously it requires full committee. We did not have a difficulty getting through that process. And we also have to go through IRB at the Department of Corrections. And I will say, just here's a plug for the DOC. I was shocked at just how responsive. I mean, there was a research partner who would call me and say, do you need any help with any of the wardens? Do you need me to reach out to somebody? How can we help you do that? And so I think there's oftentimes this sense of, take a step back. At least my experience was, what can we do to help to get you into the prisons? So just as a follow-up, I guess.
I couldn't agree more with Marla's approach. I feel like Marla really just vindicated what I said, that face-to-face contact really matters. Our clients at the Bronx Defenders, they're very, we have a very communicative and amiable relationship. We have special projects like our commissary run. Our last commissary run was last summer, and we deposited $100 to over 300 of our clients, totaling to close to $30,000. And yeah, but I feel like the reason why many of our clients, especially our Spanish-speaking incarcerated clients, did not answer did not write down answers to the qualitative questions was because, there is a reality that, some clients do not feel comfortable writing down their thoughts. They feel comfortable saying their thoughts, verbally. So I feel like face-to-face encounters really do matter. And if it means, sending, telling an attorney, hey, let your client know about this survey, or if it means, so that, we need to keep in mind of power dynamics. If it means sending someone who's not in their legal team, hey, maybe you should answer our survey. I don't know which approach it would be better, but I do know face-to-face interactions has to be the best approach to encourage more respondents to respond to all surveys.
Can I just do a very quick follow-up, which is I'm going to make a plug for involving university and college classes in any way you can. There is such a plug these days for service learning classes where you can get students who would love doing this kind of work, which is how that's how our project started. Actually, it was a service learning class where I, took students, took undergrads, went down to the jail. I mean, I'll tell you, that was a highlight for them. And so I just make that plea because I see that now more than ever, that universities are moving in that direction. And so if you have a university that's close by that you can work with, I suspect you would find faculty in a variety of different departments who would be willing to work with you to initiate such a project.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. I love this discussion so far. Are there things that people have questions about still or would like to discuss that we haven't touched on yet?
Meg, one question. And if this was already discussed, sorry for bringing it up again. How soon should we, after we digest the information that we got from our clients and community members, how soon should we send out another survey? Like how long should the original survey results be in storage until we ask for more information from our clients?
I mean, I don't think I have an answer to that necessarily. I don't know if anyone else.
I was just gonna say, I think a lot of people's instincts will be, it depends on what you're trying to measure. And if you think that you have sort of outdated information, if circumstances have changed and you want to measure sort of if things have changed since the last one. But yeah, I think I'm curious about the question of like, how long can you do these can you collect data over the course of like 3 years and be like, we found these things, or is it going to be too different from like the beginning of the process to the end? And I think those are hard research questions that might be specific to to each project. So yeah, I wonder if anybody else has insights on this.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, if you have the resources, which I understand is probably not the case for most people, but I would argue for like putting something like this in as kind of like standard procedure. Like this is just what you do forever now. Like this is part of how we evaluate our practice, is to get these surveys from as many people as we can. But I do understand that that's a lot of work, a lot of work, and it's probably some dedicated staff. So I think most offices would not be able to swing that because their staff have other work to do. I'll pass off to you.
I just have, like, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this, but one helpful guidepost might be that if you are doing client surveys over time, then that gives you the opportunity to look at whether the responses changed before and after a certain thing happened. So if you are in a situation where you did your client survey 3 years ago, your program is basically providing the same services that it was back then, and you're satisfied that probably your clients now would respond in the same way, there's probably a limit to which you can rely on that the older it gets, but it's probably not an unreasonable assumption. On the other hand, if you decide next month or something like that, that we are going to introduce a new policy, let's say I don't know what it would be, we're going to require each defender to reach out to their client by phone at least once a week or something like that, which we've never required before, then that would be a really good reason to say, I'm going to use my old survey as a baseline, but after that policy goes into effect, and once I'm sure it's actually in effect, I'll do another client survey and then look to see if the trend has jumped at all. So I would say that's one thing, just to recognize that client surveys could be used as a kind of metric to track over time. And Torin's right, it's great to do them all the time, but that might be a specific reason to choose to do one, is that you feel like you just passed some threshold and you want to see if the baseline has changed or not.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm an attorney with the Office of Indigent Legal Services in New York. And I have been doing work kind of seeing what the effects of our attempt at infusing a lot of money into New York State has been in certain counties that were under settlement litigation. And it's not directly related to surveying clients, but we did a pretty big survey initiative where we surveyed investigators, social workers, supervisors, attorneys in 5 specific counties back in 2020. And then we reported that data in the aggregate, and it was very specific questions. Then in the next year, 2021, we did follow-up interviews with attorneys who answered those surveys and kind of got more of that qualitative information, but we were able to present it in a very formulaic way. That's on our website if anybody's interested in that. And I felt like that was a good one. You know, I've been hearing a lot about these phrases that you might get in an interview and how to use them. We were able to track trends in our interviews because we had an interview guide. So, you know, if people were talking about the use of non-attorney professionals, you know, we could see the overall trends and then have a couple great quotes about that. And so I think that's a way that you could do it with clients, you know, with client information, is you see these overall trends about attorneys and then a couple great quotes, something like that. So those are just my thoughts on how we've kind of been building upon our research, obviously in a different perspective, but I'm here because we are very interested in getting the client perspective and working with providers in New York to try to get that. So this has been a really great and informative discussion.
Couple minutes left. Go ahead, Noel.
Yeah, I just wanted, to bring some light on the logistics side. When we mailed out our over 300 paper mailed surveys to our incarcerated clients, we also included a return envelope with the postage already paid for, so that our client, after they were done, responding to our survey, can just send it back to our office. So, just to bring in light to, on the logistical side.
Yeah, I think that's always important. Obviously, go ahead, Ellie.
I'm also thinking of the logistics. There's been something that's been playing in my head of based on what someone else said, of when you send out surveys and then if people respond and you're currently representing them, like, and if they give specific critiques, like my attorney's hasn't talked to me in 3 months, like what do you do then to again make this information not just extractive like for our survey, but to have like a customer service department that will follow up with that individual, or will do something to acknowledge the information coming in when it's raising problems.
That's a good question. When it came to our survey, we we handed our clients the survey, but also we attached a summary of the purpose of the survey, and we asked specifically, you do not have to write down your name. Please do not write down your name, so that you know that you won't get any repercussions no matter how you answer this question back from your legal team. And we also asked them if you don't need to write down your attorney's names either, because again, we want you to feel that you have this cloak of invincibility and nothing can come back to you. Aside from that, one of our questions was, we asked questions like, how often do you interact with your legal team? And really, some clients, they decided to, ignore our suggestions. They included their name, they included the name of their legal team. And we didn't really put that much emphasis in telling, when it came to a negative critique, and telling that specific attorney, hey, your client said this about you. Instead, we judged the results of our survey as a whole. And for instance, I believe it was question 7, how often do you interact with your legal team? The most popular response was a few times a week. And then we asked another question. Do you feel like interactiveness, the more you interact with your client, the more you interact with your legal team, the more satisfied you feel with your representation? We found more interactiveness equals to greater satisfaction. So we made presentations to all of our practices, and we told our colleagues, our lawyers and our social workers, hey, when clients were asked how often you interact with your legal team, our incarcerated clients, most of them said a few times a week. And when asked, does more interactiveness lead to greater satisfaction, they said yes. So our interpretation was, we should interact with our clients more, and we know we should interact with our clients more will lead to greater satisfaction. That was really how we approached it. We didn't want to single out anyone, any lawyer or social worker. We just wanted to send out our client's message as a whole to the organization. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunately we're coming up at our end time. I think just on that note though, I think that all makes sense, but I think the in some ways that's the difference between like client surveys and sort of understanding like global issues about the office, and then other types of client feedback. And sort of I think that was something we maybe were going to discuss, but sort of ran out of time. But I think that definitely is something to keep in mind. Just real quick, if anyone knows of a collection of client satisfaction surveys, Scott Ellers was asking about it, or any research, if you all want to send that to me or anyone at the IDRA board, we can collect it and disseminate it to people also, if that's something people are interested in. I don't know if people have surveys that they're willing to share with us, but I would be happy to take those in and get them out to people. All right, so thank you all so much for this discussion. It's been very, very interesting. And I hope you all have a wonderful Friday and a great weekend.
Thank you, Meg.
Thanks, Meg.
Thanks.
Adios, everybody.
Bye.
Everyone.